Welcome to this week's program. We're going to be looking at maintenance as far as ride-ons is concerned, because it's coming to the end of the season, and also a country pub with an interesting history. But first of all, important diseases transmitted by dogs and cats. Hydatid is the first one, but it seems to have gone away.
Yes, that's good. It's been deemed to be eradicated from New Zealand for some years now, but it is this period, this sort of 10-year period, that it's most important to be quite vigilant. And I think it's the number one dog disease. I think it's become famous because of the obviously the health risk to humans. But it is very important that the onus remains that correct dog feeding is undertaken, because that's really the hallmark of control. I think a lot of people remember the old dog dosing strips and think drug therapy was the number one.
Well, it just made them scour, didn't it?
It was an adjunctive. Yeah, it kills the tapeworm, but the number one thing is to break the cycle, and so make sure that that the dogs are fed either meat or offal that's been frozen for at least 10 days, that deactivates the cysts, or cooked, well cooked at over 90 degrees.
And pick up dead sheep.
Absolutely, so there's no scavenging. But there are another few very similar meat quality diseases that should be talked about in the same sort of arena as hydatids, which are probably more concerning and more important these days for economic reasons. And of course, the big one is sheep measles, basically transmitted the same way. And false hydatids we don't hear too much of these days, but is a meat quality problem. We get sort of mobile cysts in the body cavities of sheep in particular. And there's a very similar parasite called Cysticercus bovis, which is the cow equivalent, if you like, of sheep measles. It's seen in the tongues and cheeks and mainly the head muscles of cows. But very interestingly, the definitive host of that parasite, whereas in sheep measles the definitive host is dogs, the definitive host in Cysticercus bovis, the cow form, is the human. And there has been a relatively recent outbreak in Southland, so it makes one wonder what's been going on, because the eggs are transmitted in the faeces of the definitive host. So you'd wonder what's been going on in the dairy paddocks around Southland. But anyway, there has been an outbreak of
Don't think we want to go there. I think we're quietly moving along. False hydatids is an interesting one.
Yeah, so again, it's transmitted virtually the same. The life cycle is the same as hydatids and sheep measles. But rather than forming a tiny little cyst in the muscle, false hydatids forms a fluid-filled cyst that then detaches and actually floats freely in the body cavity. So it's a meat quality issue again, rather than a human health one.
And obviously the processing companies will get a bit funny about
downgrading, yeah. So,
yeah. Neospora?
Neospora is very important to talk about at the moment, because it's thought to be the number one cause of abortion in cows, and it gives the dairy industry in particular quite a bit of problems. Initially, when we first started seeing these type of abortions, we didn't know exactly what the parasite was, and for years and years we classified it as Neospora-like, rather than Neospora definitively, but we now know that it is indeed Neospora. The definitive host of Neospora is the dog, and so although it's a very complex life cycle and the disease can be transmitted between cows, and we also have a process we call vertical transmission in cows, where it can be passed from an infected dam to the unborn fetus, so we can get continuation of infection that way. Anything we can do to prevent the dog ingesting products of birth or abortion from cows, or inadequately cooked or prepared cow meat or offal, is going to go a long way to help controlling that disease as well.
So the dog and what it eats seems to be a very, very important factor.
Exactly. So basically, as I've alluded, these parasitic diseases that we've been talking about today, the definitive host is the integral key to the life cycle of the parasite, and sheds eggs, and then we always have what's called an intermediate host, which is involved in completion of the life cycle. So that could be the sheep and sheep measles, the cow, as I mentioned, in C. bovis, the cow in Neospora, and then the life cycle is closed by the definitive host, the dog, then ingesting cysts, the cystic form of the parasite, from untreated or uncooked offal or meat from the intermediate host, and that's how the life cycle is completed.
So easy to break if you boil, if you cook everything or freeze it.
Yep.
Toxoplasmosis, that's cats.
That's cats. So that's, the poor old dog's got a hammering today. We'll talk about the cat now. So toxo, obviously again is a well-known human problem, but also in the sheep arena, it's one of the number one causes of abortion, particularly in two-tooth or first mating sheep. So yes, the cat is the definitive host, sheds eggs in the faeces. These can then accidentally be ingested by the sheep grazing. If that occurs during pregnancy, the parasite will invade the placenta and cause the abortion. It's vaccinatable, and luckily the vaccine is a lifelong vaccine, so it's a vaccine that you would use pre-mating, pre-tupping in first mated sheep, whether you're mating hoggets or two-tooths, and that will infer lifelong protection. Humans, again, if there's toxo around, humans can be accidentally infected. That can either be through gardening, perhaps where a cat's been in the garden, but very importantly that people need to be aware is if someone is preparing raw meat, preparing some mutton for dinner, for instance, very important to keep aware of the risk of transfer of disease through hand to mouth when handling raw meat that may have been contaminated with toxoplasma. So hand washing, again, just basic hygiene practices are very, very important.
I mean, if you're getting some lamb that's rare, you're not going to run a risk, are you?
No, because the cooking process will heat even that rare piece of meat to a temperature that's high enough to damage and deactivate the cystic form of the parasite.
Laboratory testing, does that sort of come into part of the overall?
Obviously we use it in the diagnosis of abortions, for instance, and unfortunately in the cattle scene, and the dairy cow scene especially, we still, even with very good diagnostic tests, we're still only getting about a 60% diagnostic rate as to cause of abortion. But the majority of those diagnosed in cattle are Neospora, but very importantly, in the likes of sheep measles, if we've got an outbreak, you can test the dogs. So that can give the farmer peace of mind that his own practices are standing up, his feeding practices and his management practices are standing up, and the incursion on his property will then obviously have come from an outside source or another dog, someone visiting the farm that hasn't treated their animal. So blood testing the farm dogs in the face of an outbreak will actually help identify where the issue has come from.
Nick, thank you very much indeed, and a very interesting subject as always with him. After the break, we're going to be looking at how to make sure you get the mileage out of your ride-on. Welcome back to Rob's Country. Well, it's just about the end of the lawn mowing season, so I thought we'd better take a look at what you should be doing to make sure that next season your ride-on's working according to plan.
Maintenance is basically a big part of ride-on lawnmowers because they're obviously working in dusty, wet conditions half the time, which is quite hard on a machine. So service-wise, we suggest you get them serviced every 50 hours, which is basically most people once a year. The average person does about 50 hours a year on a ride-on lawnmower. So
some of them would have hour meters on them.
Yeah, a lot of them do. A lot of the cheaper ones don't. But then we can actually fit our clocks to most machines as well. So that is a thing that we can always put on if you wish, basically.
Yeah, that's fine. So what are the main things that we need to do during the year?
Basically is checking oil and checking your air filter, making sure that's nice and clean. Cleaning down the machine's quite a good thing as well, just obviously if it's cleaner it's going to work nicer. Checking belts, you can just visually check belts for cracks and stuff like that as well, because there's nothing worse when you go out to mow your lawn and you can't because your belt breaks halfway through it or something like that, you know, and it's usually on a Sunday.
It'll always be on a Sunday.
Yeah.
Is that just an eye thing? You just have a look and...
Yeah, you can just visually have a bit of a look and just see if there's any cracks or anything like that you can visually see on a belt. Once again, sticks are really bad for belts because your cutter deck's sort of hanging down quite low and it sort of can funnel sticks right into that cutter deck, and they get jammed between your pulleys and your belts, which will basically burn the belt out or crack the belt.
You would hear that?
No, you probably wouldn't actually, because your engine's sort of putting out a few RPMs, which is making a bit of noise, and
you're wearing earmuffs.
And you're wearing earmuffs, of course. So no, you probably wouldn't hear it. It's just more just visually checking when you actually are mowing as well. Any big sticks or anything on your lawn, moving before you start operation, basically.
Stones and blades.
Stones and blades always go together. Just keep your blades nice and sharp. Hey, you're always going to hit a stone. There's not a lot you can do about it unless you walk over your lawn before you mow and move any little pebble. But you just keep your eye on your blades as well. You usually tell the finish isn't as good as what it should be. You might start getting the grass being torn instead of actually cut, which means the blades need a bit of a sharpen up, basically.
Best thing to do is bring it into somebody like yourself?
Yeah, definitely. We can take care of all that sort of service work for you. We basically usually suggest, obviously, the once a year service, and we usually do that in June and July. We do a big service special.
And that's changing the oil?
It's changing the oil, cleaning your air filter, your spark plugs, just a good general check over your machine, basically, is what we do. We pretty much pull them apart and go over them, check all your bearings.
That's an ongoing expense, is it?
Yes, it is. Yeah, it definitely is. There's always something going on them. Like I say, the dust gets to pretty much everything on a machine. So there's always something wearing, which is basically, you know, often needs replaced or greased up or lubed up. It's just
things
part of
like
it.
wheel bearings and stuff.
Yeah, they have usually bushes in the front wheels, which actually do wear a little bit as well. But then you do have a lot of linkages and stuff like that as well that will wear, just because of the dust mainly.
And you've got clutches and all that sort of stuff?
You do have clutches. They're pretty much maintenance free. A lot of our machines these days have electric clutches on them, which is nice and simple for engaging your blades. They don't really cause a lot of issues. The other ones have cables, which usually engage your cutter deck. They stretch a little bit, but same thing, they don't wear out that quickly.
And of course battery.
Batteries, yep, pretty much every ride-on has a battery on it.
But
they are
charge, would it?
Yeah, they basically, what was the same thing we suggest with most people with a battery is charge it once a year. Usually sitting around over the winter, you don't start it as often, so when you come to use it at the start of spring, you might start your mower, but it won't keep it fully charged. And unfortunately, a ride-on's not like a car where it puts out a lot of charge back into your battery, so it's worth it at the start of spring giving a bit of a charge up just to get that surface charge back up there.
And for goodness sake, keep it clean.
Keep it clean, yeah. It's the biggest thing is a lot of machines get a lot of grass on them. We've had ride-ons come in and the grass is actually growing on the cutter deck because they've got that much stuff lying around them. And of course all that grass goes towards your bearings and your cutter deck, which will make them wear a lot quicker as well. But your main big things is really checking that oil and keeping that air filter nice and clean.
And you should do that during the season, Scott.
Definitely. Every time you mow, if not every second, basically your oil. It's easy enough to do as well. It's basically, you know, everything has a dipstick on it as far as that goes. It's a matter of pulling it out, just wiping it. You've got two holes, which basically is minimum, maximum. Sit it back in, and then basically it should pull out, and you should be back between those two holes.
And that all so clean that you can't see it. Easy again, there it is.
Yeah.
It looks good.
It looks good, and it says add or full basically as well.
And the air filter, how do you clean an air filter?
Air filter is a few different ways to clean it. Every engine has a different sort of filter on it as well, but you can actually undo your filters. And a lot of people these days at home have air compressors with duster guns on them, so they can actually blow them out themselves. The other way you can do it is they have a pre-filter on it which you can wash. So you can actually wash that in hot soapy water and just let that dry again. And basically that is a pre-filter, so that gets rid of a lot of your bigger dust and grass particles anyway. And if you haven't got a duster gun at home, even just give them a tap out. Just give them a bit of a bang out and you'll be amazed at what actually comes out of them. Or if you're going past, just rip it into us and we'll give it a blowout for you as well. So it's easy done. But that's what basically, what goes through there goes into your engine. So if you have dust and stuff going through there, it's going to dust out your motor.
And if it gets totally choked up, it's not going to be able to use it properly.
Yeah, you won't be at maximum RPM or performance, so you'll basically hear it just sit there and struggle. You know, at the end of the day, these motors are anywhere from $2,500 to $3,000, so you do want to look after that side of it, because the last thing you want to do is come in and need a new engine for your ride-on lawnmower, because it gets quite hefty and expensive.
And that would be an understatement. You notice we did use a brand new one, so we didn't get our hands too dirty during that item. After the break, we're going to be talking about rural women, New Zealand. Welcome back to Rob's Country. Successful authors, you lot.
Aren't we? No, we're very excited with that cookbook we've just released, because it's already gone into a second print, which is actually quite astounding. So soon. It's only been out in the bookshops for a month, so we're quite thrilled with that, and it's within the top 3 of the bestsellers list each week. So obviously a real winner with people. So
And this is the baking one, isn't it?
This is the baking one. It's called A Good Baking Day, and people can still order it directly through our website and all the good bookshops. So yeah,
Isn't it fabulous that baking seems to be coming back? But
well,
you think of a 97-year-old baking, but you don't think of a 17-year-old.
I know, but it is, and I think it's all part of that move to be, back to know where your food comes, and a more natural lifestyle, and feeding your children well and with healthy food.
And it's fun. It's creative.
Oh, it is fun and creative, and it's a great way of working with your children and teaching them some life skills and setting them up for their own futures. So it's great.
Cake tins will be coming back. We'll end up people getting cake tins.
I know, it's brilliant.
Well, it's probably Tupperware things at the moment.
Oh, that's good.
Much more serious note,
Yeah.
depression.
Depression.
It's still a major concern.
It is a major concern in the rural sector, and particularly now with the weather events that we're having. So much rain out there. People are struggling to get the harvest in, and yet in other parts of the country there's drought, so they're struggling to get enough feed to feed their animals and livestock. So there is a huge amount of additional stress to what we normally would have in the rural sector at any time, and so we are seeing increasing depression, and that is a real worry. Because people tend to, when they're depressed, they tend to isolate themselves, and if you're already living in an isolated environment and you isolate yourself further, it makes it really, really hard. So really hoping and encouraging people to watch out for their neighbours, keep talking, keep being involved socially, because just getting out, getting off the farm occasionally will give you the break. There's been a lot of rain in our area, so there's only so many rainy jobs you can do, and at this school holidays, take the time and get it off the farm for a day. Take the kids to the movies and give yourself a break from it. And I think that's a really important thing for people, is to have a break from whatever's stressing you, so that you're not sitting there in amongst it all the time, and you get out and get away from it for a moment and give yourself some fresh air and keep talking to people.
Kerry, I can tell you from personal experience that you don't.
Of course you don't. And it's really hard. It's very hard. And
I just don't want to talk to people when I'm depressed, and I just go quiet.
And I think that's one of the first signs for people that there is a problem. So, if you're watching someone, you think, hang on, they're not their normal self. It's one of the key signs that someone is depressed. And it could be a gregarious, outgoing person suddenly becoming quiet and introverted, or the other way around, someone who's normally quiet suddenly becoming very talkative, very out there. And you're thinking, hang on, this isn't normal behaviour. So that's the key for anyone who's got a partner they're concerned about, is look for the abnormal behaviour. And that's an indication that you need to step in and do something to help them.
The other very dangerous area is people who don't have a partner.
Absolutely. There's a really great initiative at the moment, the National Depression Initiative, and it's being, the poster boy is John Kirwan, and he's doing a fantastic job.
He was something to do with the blues at some stage.
The blues, yeah, has the odd, yeah. Which is probably appropriate, blues and depression, but there you go.
Well, they call it blues, don't they?
They do.
Sorry.
But, even at this time of year, we have what they call SAD, the seasonal affective disorder, which is essentially the winter blues. And some people just get depressed in winter. And some of it's to do with the season or the weather. But John Kirwan's got this amazing program online that people can get online, and it's a self-help program. So with depression, a lot of people don't like to go out and ask for help.
Or they don't know how to.
They don't know how to, or they don't want anyone else to know. But with an online program that's self-help, you can get in there and you can have, come up with some great tools to help yourself without everyone else having to know. And for a lot of depressed people, that's one of their biggest bugbears. They just don't really want to
And
share
boys
it with
can
anyone.
cry.
So you can get self-help at home.
Yep.
And John Cohen's program is absolutely amazing. It's really effective. So-
See, and when I said boys can cry, I mean, to me that's very
totally.
serious. Go out
It
on the
is.
tractor and just bawl your eyes out if you need to.
Absolutely. Get down the back of the farm and have a good cry. Get it out of your system. Those things are really quite powerful and just getting it off your chest. And some people find other things, just keeping a journal, just write it all down. And you don't even have to show anyone or read it. It's just, I guess, that psychological thing, you've got it out. You've got rid of it and just write it all down, chuck it away, set fire to it, do whatever you like, but you've got it out. And I think that's a big help for a lot of people. It just gets it off their chest. So I think watch out for the neighbours, keep an eye on them, offer that, offer to give them a hand, help them out, and, just be a friend to people.
There'll be
Important.
those who don't show any sign. I mean, you can't, that must be heartbreaking.
It is, and I just don't know the answer to that, but there's, great organisations out there to help. If you think there's a concern, or you think, most of us, I think, know when someone's life has changed a bit. You know that, farming is difficult, so people must be feeling a bit of pressure. So, there's initiatives out there, and, Rural Women are fundraising at the moment for providing top-up counselling and support for rural people, and that'll be channelled through the Rural Support Trusts, and that's the project we've got on all year this year. It's one of our main priorities, and we're calling the project Laughter's the Best Medicine. Just
It is.
simply, laughter is. If you can have
Because-
a laugh, get out, just get it off your chest.
Because to me, it's like a drought. It's very insidious. It just
Oh.
creeps up and creeps up and creeps up, and you don't realise you're in a drought until suddenly there's no feed left.
That's right, and
so
I think depression is a bit like that.
It is.
Just creeps up on people.
Laughter. Well done. You guys are going to get involved.
We are. We see it as a serious issue, particularly in rural, because it affects the family. It's not just the individual who's depressed. It affects their relationships within the family, and it leads to all kinds of other problems. And it's the women that have to carry the load. They're trying to support the family and a depressed partner, so they then get depressed. So it becomes a family issue. So it needs a family solution.
Very briefly, home care.
Home care, definitely issues on funding in home care, support for the care workers, and a lot of that's to do with the way the DHB's contract for service providers, particularly for rural services, changes in the types of services being offered, which are going to impact on people. Increasingly, we're seeing contracts now where, unless a person needs personal care, such as showering and changing of wound dressings and assistance with medication and so on, they're not going to get the home help. There'll be no one to come and do the housework to help them. So, it sort of flies in the face a wee bit of the government's policy of ageing in place. They want people to age at home, but they're not funding anything to help them do that. Chronically underfunded. We have contracts now where service providers aren't able to pay any more than the average wage, the minimum wage, and we've got to look as a society on, is that how we want to value the people who care for our elderly and disabled? Mileage rates are a huge issue, and we've been campaigning on this for many years, but many DHBs are still only contracting at a level that allows a mileage rate of something like 30 cents per kilometre, and yet we know that the government's own rates and what they say is a standard rate is closer to 70 cents than they pay their own workers that. So, really hard to get good quality care, and that will impact on rural people in our ability to get care workers prepared to travel out those long distances to support rural people when they're not getting good mileage money.
Good thinking, and I know you're not going to let it go.
No, we won't.
Thank you very much indeed. After the break, it's Horticulture with Jim, and we'll take you to an old pub, which is very fitting that Jim should be just before that. Welcome back to Rob's Country. I guess as far as grape industry is concerned, it's a country of two halves.
It certainly is. We're having an interesting harvest right at this stage, Rob. It's getting towards the end of it, thank goodness. But with all these cloudy days and drizzle, especially in the east coast of the South Island, we've had some pretty dramatic results in terms of what's coming out of the vines. Wine is always made on the vine, as I've said that before. And there's certainly some truth in that. But this year, the winemakers are going to earn their money. And we are blessed in New Zealand with some very good winemakers, but there's going to have to be some intervention by them to get the grapes turned into some really nice wines, which I know they'll do in the long term.
Has the North Island been better because they haven't been getting the rain, have they? They've been drought.
Well, they haven't been tracking very well and on time, and the vintage is coming in pretty well. Although just in the about last 10 days of their harvest, they also had some indifferent inclement weather, but wasn't too challenging for them. And in the South Island, the Chardonnays and the Pinot Noir came off very, very well. But then the later varieties, their aromatic ones, going through to Riesling, and a little bit of trouble. In fact, just having a look at some vineyards earlier in this week, that they're going to actually just harvest them and drop them on the ground and not actually take them into the vats. Better to do that, get them off the vine so there's no disease problems going forward, but it's not very good on the pocket.
Oh, Jim.
But what the weather really does is, I don't want to give the impression that because we've had a bit of an indifferent weather pattern down in the South Island through the main part of the harvest, that we're going to have bad wines. We're certainly not. There'll be some really good wines, but they may not have the longevity with them. What happens usually when wine or grapes get involved with humid days and damp conditions, as it has been, that they become what we call in the industry dozy. And what happens is the acids drop out reasonably quickly before the bricks or the sugars come up. So the balance isn't there. And usually the pH of that balance is a little bit high. So what's going to happen is that the winemakers will interfere with especially the acid side of it. And what that really does in the longer term to the wine is that I was just drinking a nice 2009 Riesling the other day, and it was drinking beautifully. So 4 or 5 years later, and it'll be drinking that same wine will drink really well in 5 years' time too. But the 2014 vintage may be something that we're going to drink a little earlier because of the acid, and the lack of the ability of that wine to cellar, especially the aromatics, on a longer term. So quality will still be there, but we may have to drink them a year or two earlier than we normally would.
Director Doug said, what a shame. Get onto it.
Quite a good challenge, really. But if you have a look at the 2007 and 9 years, especially, there's some wonderful wines coming out with those now. I think when 2016-17 comes along, we'll be drinking 2014 wines to actually move them along, and still have 2012s and 2013s behind them.
Ooh, that's good. You said some of the varieties, Viogniers and things are starting to come through. People are learning how to pronounce Viognier.
Viognier, that's right. It's one of those aromatics, which is stunning wine, and it needs to
apricot,
be
beautiful dried
apricot. It's got some lovely pear. It's got a little bit like. It can be a little bit like Pinot Gris, where it's got nice pear tones to it too. But it's an exciting wine. It's one that if we get into the nice growing conditions of quite hot weather, especially in the autumn, it's got some tremendous. It's got quite sweet, but it lingers on the palate, and it's a really nice wine. It's just another complement to the range of aromatics, which we do very well in New Zealand. Starting with the Sauvignon Blancs, going right through Viognier, Pinot Gris, and going on to the Rieslings.
Just finding the Viognier, that's the trouble.
Yes, I know of a very nice vineyard of Viognier in Waipara, which the North Canterbury people should really be enjoying. But probably our best Viogniers right at the moment still come out of Hawke's Bay. And then you've got one or two, dare I say it, coming out of Australia that are pretty stunning too.
No,
it's the heat,
keep with New Zealand. Plant breeding.
Plant breeding, pretty serious situation we've got, Rob, going forward in that plant breeding programs are starting to become a little affected by the lack of being able to import material such as canes or vines or whatever they may be. Because of the intrusions we've had of recent times, the PSA, especially with the kiwi fruit industry, and recently, obviously, the fruit fly has been another reminder that we've got to be careful at our borders. I'm not for one moment saying that our border control isn't up there. I think it is up there, and the politicians get in there and have a bit of a grizzle about it, but we're up there on that standard, and we hold ourselves up pretty highly. Unfortunately, I came in on an aircraft not so very long ago, and there was a person eating some coleslaw, which he put together in Canada, in Vancouver, before she came home. And she just didn't think about what she was actually doing.
Got it through.
She was consuming it. She got it out of her backpack and consumed it while she was waiting for her luggage, for crying out loud. And along came the authorities and gave her a good talking to, of course, and destroyed it. But I mean, those are things that people do, and they talk about the boaties and whatever that come across the Tasman and bring these things. But there are so many areas that intrusion can take place. And we are seriously onto it. There's no doubt about that. I mean, New Zealand agriculture and horticulture don't want these intrusions. Of course they don't. And farmers and everybody else are very, very conscious of that. Having said that, it's stopping us bringing in material that we want to continue to develop and enhance our plant breeding, because our plant breeding in New Zealand is very, very good and world class. So some programs, I mean, we might bring a particular, remind ourselves about Viognier. Viognier may have been brought into the country 10, 12, 15 years ago, and now it's just starting to be realised. I mean, that's what we're talking about when we talk about plant breeding. It's a long-term project.
Jim, thank you very much indeed. And it's interesting, staying on a similar sort of a subject really, but isn't history wonderful? I caught up with the guys who are running the Leithfield pub.
It's 100 years last year. In fact, I've been a pub on the site for longer than that. The pub before that burnt down, and it was rebuilt 100 years ago. So I had a big celebration last year, which I understand, well, I weren't here for it, but it was quite large. And it hasn't actually changed much since it was built. I think there's been just a room at the end here added on. That's pretty much it. The same guy that designed the Sefton Hotel, which is probably about 5-10k down the road. So yeah, no, there's pictures up there of the old design, actually, the original designs for this, and they're all on the wall around the pub.
So it stood up over world wars and earthquakes.
Absolutely, yeah. It hasn't moved a budge, nor have many of the patrons. So it's still got the underground cellars. We lower the kegs by a rope still here. So it's, a very old traditional hotel.
The block out the front for mounting onto your horse for hunts.
The upping stone, and that's part of the logo here actually. The upping stone, that's actually older than the pub. That's about close to 130 years old, I think, and that was for the hunt when they used to come, and I suppose they had a couple of sherbets and couldn't get up on their horse, so they had a stone to do it for, helping them get there.
Getting off was probably dead easy.
Yeah, absolutely.
So tell me about your entrance into becoming the boss man here, or the publican.
Oh, well, my wife and I, we weren't always in pubs. I was in the computer industry. I had a company throughout the South Pacific, but it meant we were on a plane most weeks, and so we got tired of that, and we decided to put our feet up for a while, and got bored with that real quick. So we bought a hotel in Rangiora called Robbie's. Unfortunately, as a result of the earthquakes, the council deemed it to be a dangerous building. One of the 2 bottles of Corona or the 2 champagne flutes that we broke could have fallen on someone. But it was an old building, triple brick, lime mortar. We naively hung around for a year thinking there would be enough time to fix it, but clearly not. And so then we bought this place, and we love hospitality. Hospitality is a great industry to be in. It's a tough industry, but you just have a good time doing it. I think we spoke earlier, people come out to a hotel to just have a good time. Your job as a proprietor, as a publican, is just to facilitate that, and so that's what we try and do here.
Bit of an emphasis on food?
There has to be. The reality nowadays is that little pubs like this, country pubs, are simply not going to make ends meet by just pulling copious amounts of beer and alcohol. You've got to complement it with food. That goes in line with a lot of what I suppose the powers that be are trying to achieve. But there has to be a balance between that, because country pubs like this serve a purpose beyond food and drink. We're trying very hard. We've got all of our old chefs back.
From Robbie's, they've come back.
Yeah, from Robbie's have come back. Yeah, no, we're very fortunate. We've got wonderful chefs and wonderful staff here, and we're working very hard at food, but it takes time. The reality is people will have to sort of come here, dine, enjoy their experience, and word of mouth is really the most effective way of sort of promoting the place in lots of ways. And that takes time, and so we'll just continue to work away at that.
You're something very special for the local community because there's nowhere else to meet.
No, there's no other retail outlet or can't whip down to the corner shop or the cafe down the road. We are it in this wee Leithfield village. And so the hotel actually provides, it's just simply not a place to come and have a beer or something to eat. There are people that come in here, will have a cup of coffee and sit down and natter. They'll come in here. We have the Lions group come in here every month to have their meeting. There are a lot of places. We have a lot of retirement villages come out here as well, because it's a place out in the country. But it's not like they're quaffing down heaps of pints of Guinness on their way. It's a service just not for these guys locally here, but for other people around the sort of general community, as a meeting place, as somewhere they can take their probus groups, those sorts of things. They come out because reality is in the cities it's sometimes not necessarily catered for as effectively as what it is out in the wee country pubs like this.
And Mike, this will be symbolic of a lot of pubs in New Zealand.
And I think it's the little pubs in New Zealand, the country pubs in New Zealand are going to struggle. The new laws coming in are making it even more difficult for us. By and large, most of the publicans in places like this are responsible and they look after their customers. We care about our customers.
Do you want them to keep coming back?
We absolutely do, but I think there's got to be a level of pragmatism and faith put in the publicans who, it's in our interest to make sure they are coming back and looking after them. And the more sort of draconian type rules that are dumped upon little places like this here, that is harder and harder. We're going to battle through it and we'll get there. We're confident of that in terms of the way in which we manage our business. But there are places that, and we've got a very good client base and a very loyal bunch of locals here that support us. But there are smaller pubs that are going to struggle, and it's just not it doesn't solve the problem of drinking, because you'll go to the supermarket and you'll buy 3 times as much alcohol for the same price. And they'll be all drinking at home in an unsupervised environment.
And then driving from their mate's place.
Here, absolutely. Here is where they come here. We do take responsibility for people to the limits that we can. And a lot of that, if you don't have somewhere like your local to go to, a lot of that disappears. And rather than solving a problem, it exacerbates a problem. You can't blame the supermarkets. They're operating within the laws as they are. But hitting little places like this is not the solution.
But it's lovely to have a local.
Oh, absolutely. And I tell you, if this place wasn't here, God knows what would happen to a lot of the locals. But they would actually have to travel somewhere to have that social interaction. On a Friday night here, it's chock-a-block. They're all playing the jukebox. They're just having a good old time. This is what communities like this love to get together, have a good time. The jukebox gets hammered here.
But they're not all drinking alcohol either.
Absolutely not. You'll have them here, and we had Friday night. My wife was one, but they were just singing. All they wanted to do was get up and sing, and there was a whole bunch of them doing that, and it wasn't necessarily come here and get, trolleyed. Yeah. But it was here to come and have a good time, catch up with friends. And some people did go out and have some beers. Absolutely, we're a pub. But at the same time, it certainly provides, on the weekends, it provides something that, if it's not here, I don't know what people would do.
Mark, it must be quite humbling to have a building with this history that you're now the guardian
absolutely, of. And it's we're part of just a transient lot of people that have come through. Been a lot of publicans. So every publican's listed on the board. That's been here since for the last 100 years and before, and we're just the custodians for a short period of time, and it'll be here well beyond us. So,
is it haunted?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Do tell.
Trevor's in there. There's a guy who sits at the end of the bar who apparently sits there. He's not very happy all the time, from what I can tell. And there's another person upstairs, allegedly. So, and we're happy to have ghosts in here. It's really good.
I mean, it's all part of the whole mystique and wonderment of the building.
Oh, absolutely. Look, the reality is any old building that's 100 years old is going to have some stories to it. And this building certainly has those.
And you're here sort of off the main road?
Yes, just off the main road as you're driving north towards Amberley. We're about 5k before Amberley. There's a sign on there that says Historic Pub and Gallery. And there's a small gallery here that we have with local artists display their wares. And and by all means, drop in and have a beer, pie.
Well, I've just done that. Your pies are bloody brilliant. I mean, they're locally made.
We make everything here on site. We don't bring anything in. We know what goes in it that way. So in terms of developing the food, it's really important, number one, to have good chefs, which we're very fortunate to have, but number two, to actually have quality food that you make yourself, because we don't like bringing stuff in.
It'd be tragic if we did lose those country pubs, wouldn't it? And what those he was saying about the social issues, bang on the nail. After the break, we're going to be talking Federated Farmers. Welcome back to Rob's Country. You've been looking at local government funding. What's happening there?
That's right. 2 weeks ago, Local Government New Zealand, which is the organisation that represents our 78 councils, announced that they will be doing a review of local government funding. Basically, Local Government New Zealand is concerned about demographic pressures, economic pressures, costs being imposed on the sector by the central government, and concerned about the sustainability of rates-based funding to meet those costs now and particularly into the future as the population ages. And something Federated Farmers has been very keen on for a number of years, pushing the case for reform of local government funding, and it's great to see Local Government New Zealand taking up the baton and running with it.
So you've said some of the issues. I mean, how do you pick out which ones you're going to fight? Because you've got to pick your fights.
Yep. I think our main thrust in participating in this review will be to try and get a reduction in the reliance that councils make on property value rates to fund their activities. Now, New Zealand is quite unique in that local government is expected to fund around 60% of its revenue from rates, which is much higher than similar countries overseas. And what we're keen to see is some sort of alternative funding mechanisms, whether it's government transfers or greater use of user charges, etc., to try and get that funding a bit more equitable and more sustainable going forward. So we're not so reliant on such a rather narrow, archaic 18th century funding tool to fund modern local government.
Without putting too fine a point on it.
Yeah.
I mean, seriously taking on central government and saying, well, hey, listen, guys, I mean, they're just going to laugh at you because they've got enough worries.
Yeah, that's true, and the Prime Minister has said that he's not convinced of the case. What we'll have to do, and what Local Government New Zealand will have to do too, is to make a compelling case why there is a need for change, and particularly emphasising the way our communities and our populations are changing and will change over the next 20 years or so. There's a big demographic time bomb with a larger number of people that are hitting retirement age. They'll still be paying rates on their properties, but they won't be having the incomes to sustain those rates. And it's a similar issue for farming in that, you know, the property values have gone up dramatically in a lot of cases. It means that farmers are paying, you know, large increases in rates compared to their incomes. And so the issues are kind of similar. So what we have to do is make a cogent and clear and rational basis of the need for change, and then put up some solutions that are actually going to work. So
how do you go about creating solutions and plucking them out of thin air?
Yeah, there are quite a lot of solutions out there, potentially, and this isn't the first time that local government funding has been reviewed. So there are quite a few possible solutions. Not all of them are easy, otherwise it would have been done a long time ago. For example, the central government could put its hand in its pocket and provide a share of the money it receives from, say, GST or income tax. It could provide,
from that area sort of thing?
Yeah, potentially. You could also get more money from central government from road user charges and petrol tax revenue that currently gets spent on things like motorways and public transport. Auckland. Not that there's anything wrong with Auckland, but certainly funding for local roads has been squeezed over the last several years as more money's been put into these roads of national significance, which are all good and supported. But if you can't get the product, whether it's wood, meat, milk, from the farm or forest to the processor, then it's going to be hard to actually get that export growth we need.
Once you've worked out some of the solutions, then what's your program? Because you're actually going in, as I see it, to say, you guys are talking rubbish here.
Well, what we will be doing is working with Local Government New Zealand. It's their review. We're keen to be part of it, and we'll be making a lot of input into it. And then whatever comes out of the review, we'll need to make a very strong case for central government that it needs to take some action. And you know, it's not that long ago when there was a huge amount of public angst about rates, and it resulted in the 2007 rates inquiry. We see, you know, continual complaints and concerns from people about to their council and about their council, and we suspect that as the pressure grows going forward, that we'll only see that public pressure start to build. And we're saying let's sort this issue out now before it's too late.
How open-minded are these local bodies and things?
Well, Lawrence Yule, who's the President of Local Government New Zealand, and Malcolm Alexander, who's the CEO, they both assured us that what they want to do is a meaningful attempt at it. They're not just about just trying to find more money. It's also about finding a better system, and we're obviously going to take them at their word on that. But the real people we need to convince will be the politicians in Wellington.
Yeah. Might I say, though, that Federated Farmers is a pretty strong lobby group in Wellington?
Absolutely, and we're very proud of that too.
I mean, you don't go through doors after you've knocked, you walk through them without knocking at times.
Well, it depends on the issue, yep. Oh, look, local government funding reform has been one of our high priority issues for a number of years now, and we'll continue to push that case. I think we certainly have got good interactions with government, and they do listen to us. We just need to make sure that the case that's put forward is compelling enough.
So very briefly, the neat thing is that you don't go in with a complaint and a problem, you go in with a solution to a situation.
Absolutely, you have to go in there with a solution, and we've got solutions, and which we'll put first to Local Government New Zealand and then to central government.
Brilliant, thank you very much indeed, Nick. Damn good reason for you to become a Federated Farmers member, I would have thought. Now, Federated Farmers' phone number is on your screen now. I'm Rob Cope-Williams. You've either been watching or you've just missed Rob's Country, but I will be back at the same time next week. Until then, bye now.